Hey there, this is Rob from Southgate Media Group. The following podcast was recorded during the SMG Podcast Marathon at Indy PopCon 2018 in Indianapolis, Indiana. This podcast marathon was 10 hours long and featured 19 podcasts covering a wide variety of geek-centric topics. Before we jump into the episode, I want to thank our amazing sponsors for this SMG Podcast Marathon. Without you, it would not have been nearly as cool. Links to our sponsors can be found in the show notes and at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. First of all, thank you to Tango Comics for the exceptional event poster. Thanks to our banner sponsors, Passionerdly Podcasts, Tome Travelers Podcast, Kinda Nerdy News with KJ Podcast, Movie Madness Podcast, Ed Maudlin and the Maudlin Realty Group, Very Dark, Very Quick Podcast, Advanced TV Herstory Podcast, Seriously? Let's Play Podcast, Dice Voyeurs Podcast, The Masks of Nythralothtop Podcast, The CritShow Podcast, The Amazing LARP, Chronicles of the Realm, Midnight Matinees Podcast, The Blue Box Café in Elgin, Illinois, Otherworld Theater in Chicago, Illinois, the This Week in Geek Podcast, live at the Blue Box Podcast, the Binge Worthy Podcast, and SMG Microcons. A special thanks to the Bonus Hours Podcast Network for sponsoring our free charging station. There would have been a lot of dead devices without your support. And finally, thanks to the sponsors of our program, the Bonus Hours Podcast Network, featuring the podcast Between the Profound and Profane, Kinda Nerdy News with KJ, The Crit Show, an actual play podcast, Very Dark, Very Quick, the podcast, Passionerdly.com, featuring the podcasts Dice Voyeurs and Tome Travelers, the Kevin Long Show podcast, and finally, the upcoming book, Pod Life, Podcaster Stories. And there we go, the plugs are done. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, TV Herstoryans, to a live recording of Advanced TV Herstory here at Indy PopCon in beautiful, warm Indianapolis. I am joined today by two women who are very, very familiar with the microphone. Martha Southgate of Southgate Media Group of Chicago, huge podcast advocate and woman podcaster herself, and Jen Eads, podcaster extraordinaire, world-class podcaster, and colleague, co-conspirator, and editor, audio technician, I think is your title, of Advanced TV Herstory. So we have this is going to be like as rapid fire as we've ever done, kind of playing around with formats here on the show. And today's theme is Norman Lear's Lady Bench. Lady Bench, you ask? Yes. Because those shows of the 70s and 80s were not just carried on the shoulders of men, as we sometimes think of. We think of Red Fox, and we think of Archie Bunker and George Jefferson, and they were huge. But then there were these women. So we're going to just say what comes to mind when I talk about these wonderful, talented ladies, right. Okay? And then, but before I do, since I introduced you, Martha, what shows are you involved with right now?
I do Binge Worthy, Real Idiots, it's a movie one. We do live at the Blue Box, which is a whole ton of shows, Pop Culture Countdown. We do game shows. Let's see. I'm just starting an X-Files show called The X-Fields, and with another woman, with Melissa Maxey, and so that'll be fun. I'm trying to think what some of the other ones. I'm on break from Pinheads, which is a Pinterest podcast that I do with a woman, Teresa Sammons. Wow. Yeah, we're on a lot, and I'm not even naming them all, but there's a million of them. But yeah, so they're kind of sporadic. I do Once Upon a Time, Ever After, which is a Once Upon a Time podcast with my daughter and my husband, and I do Cuckoo for Who. We're on a break from that one right now.
So Ever After is family friendly, kid friendly. It's something that we can recommend.
All of ours are
good for kids,
clean, and so if you, they're always safe because we figure we don't want to be producing things that we can't play in our house with our kid at home. And so we always make everything, pretty. We even do, Rob and I do Orange is the New Black, and we have managed to do every single episode from every season
clean.
Like, we just, because you can certainly maneuver it, but they're fun, and they're really colorful, but they're not.
It makes you use your real vocabulary.
It makes us, it makes us have to think a little harder.
And Jen, your real vocabulary, what does that include?
It includes the Brassy Broadcast.
Nice.
Which is my podcast, and then I work with podcasters all around the world, helping them get their own podcasts out.
And you do a great job of it.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Okay, so let's reel back. Let's throw the calendar back about 40. Now we're going on almost 50 years since All in the Family premiered, and All in the Family's success as the first Norman Lear vehicle obviously owes a certain amount of gratitude to Jean Stapleton as Edith Bunker. And Jean came to that position with a tremendous background on Broadway. She earned 3 Emmys for being Edith Bunker and 2 Golden Globes. She went on to do TV, some film, not much. Edith was her big one, but she was such a staple in so many. She and Marion Ross really just epitomized that
the mom.
that very, very accessible, approachable mom figure. Now, we also know, though, that there were some other big names that rolled through All in the Family because All in the Family spawned so many other shows. And so this is just an absolute, it's a Ancestry.com knows All in the Family very well, I would say. And I'm not plugging Ancestry.com here. Sally Struthers. You remember Sally Struthers?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Sally as Gloria, and she rolled off to, what else has she done, you guys?
The Gilmore Girls.
Sally went on to win 2 Emmys and has been on Broadway. She was on Broadway really from the time that she quit All in the Family. She's come and gone many times. What a fantastic talent she was. Isabel Sanford obviously appeared as Mrs. George Jefferson when the Jeffersons were introduced as a character.
Yeah.
And then there was also Betty Garrett, who had come from Broadway and MGM as big names. So Isabel Sanford and Esther Roll and B. Arthur as Maud all came about because of All in the Family.
That's
and that
incredible.
Can't be celebrated enough.
And how many other shows? Like, does that happen? Like, has it happened since then? And I don't think it happened before that ever,
No, it certainly
But,
hadn't happened
to have
before.
that many.
Right. It
Successful.
It was phenomenal. It was a time before cable could compete, certainly. I'm guessing, Dick Wolf certainly has spawned that many shows, and Richard Belzer, I think, was on consistently across, I think, all of the Dick Wolf franchise. But that's a different anomaly. So we take Good Times, but to get to Good Times, you had to get to Maud, and I did this kind of in a weird format. So Good Times is the family set in the projects, and I did a podcast episode on Esther Roll as the single mom because she was so adamant that the family in Good Times be presented as a black family. This was the first black family sitcom on US TV, and it starred Bernadette Stanis and Debbie Allen.
I loved that show.
And Debbie Allen was only on for 2 episodes, and I talk about those episodes in the Debbie Allen podcast episode of Advanced TV Herstory.
She had to have been very young.
She was very young, and she was literally, that was the start of her career. Just think of her career and what happened as a result, because fame wasn't far after that.
Yeah.
And what have you seen Debbie Allen on lately? You guys, I'm
Help me.
totally
I
stumping.
haven't watched
What
much
have we
TV
seen her
lately.
on lately? I don't know. What?
She's on Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
We don't watch that one.
And she so another thing that Debbie Allen did, though, is she spent a tremendous amount of time turning A Different World around from its first season. But anyway, Bernadette Stanis has gone on to write 4 books and has really kind of drifted away from TV. Then you had these two. You may recall Jeanne Dubois actually was the one who sang the theme song to the Jeffersons.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I never knew. I sing.
Moving on up.
No, you do not want me to sing it. I get all the words wrong. I am infamous for my let's see. It goes now Yeah, no, I always say to the top, to a deluxe apartment in the sky, moving on up. We finally got a piece of the pie. Bees don't burn in the kitchen. Bees don't burn on the grill. Took a whole lot of trying just to get up that hill. Valley up in the big screen. Get that turn at dusk. So everyone's like, those are not the words. But to me, those were all of my childhood. That's what I sang. I really thought... No, I thought that's what they were saying. I didn't know. Okay. Yeah, so no, sorry.
So in addition to songwriting, that classic, only with different words. Jenny Dubois was also an actress. She is a singer-songwriter. She's done an album. She was a dancer. She actually earned an Emmy for her voice work, if you can believe it, and has had some other minor roles, as well as a minor role in a certain other woman's video when she did Control. So when Janet Jackson, who got her TV start, even as a very famous Jackson
was
child.
she on the show?
Yes.
Okay, wait, I can't see her. Was she the daughter?
She was Penny.
Oh, and she sang the theme song.
No, Jenny Dubois was Willona.
Why am I? Oh, you don't want me up here.
That's okay. That's okay.
That's what I'm asking.
Willona.
The one who sang. I knew Janet Jackson was on it, but I thought the other one was she on the show?
She was Willona. She was the neighbor.
Okay, I got to go back and rewatch now that I know all. Like my mind is now exploding.
Exactly.
I got to go put all the pieces
that's
back
part of the
together.
reason why we have a podcast.
That's
to
what
get you to go
happens
back
when
and
you
Very
restart.
good.
Right,
Okay.
right. So, and Jen tells me often that after she has listened to the audio that I sent her, she realizes now she's got a whole new binge to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, and we do a show called Binge Worthy, so we'll just put them right on there.
We can't emphasize enough the importance of good times. And now that the Bill Cosby show, the Cosby Show, has sort of entered into a whole different status of popularity and the capacity for it to be syndicated, it puts more importance on good times. And good times and the thought that Esther Roll and John Amos had about how that show was going to depict, create a more positive depiction of a working class black family sort of got hijacked, and that's its own little controversy, and that's covered in the podcast that I do called Esther Roll's Hope for Good Times. That gets us to some other faces you might recognize. Debbie Morgan on the left was that you guys can't see. I'm sorry. It was on All My Children as Angie Hubbard. You had Helen Martin, who, if you could see Helen Martin, you would identify her as a character actress who gave guff and gave grief just with the best timing in the world. And Helen Martin came from Broadway. The talent of these women came because they had so much work on the stage. And then Kim Fields, who went on to
Tootie.
Facts of Life, and then also Living Single.
Yes.
Yes. And Kim Fields was one of the guests on Advanced TV Herstory. And she was a delight to talk to. So she had written a book, and we got to talk about her book and her life. So I'm now going to let you advance the screen, dear.
Oh, my.
So good times. Awesome. Great. Aren't we glad we got them?
Yes.
Yes, we are. All right. On to Sanford and Son, which aired from 1972 to 1977. And you might say, Sanford and Son, oh my gosh, it was just a bunch of crabby black guys, right? And all they did was kind of yell at each other and insult each other. But there were 4 women who really made that show, for some people, palatable, but also very human and represented sort of the human condition within that working class sitcom. LaWanda Page, who, if you would recognize her, but she's the one, literally she produced a comic album called "I'll Get You, Sucka." Watch it, sucka. That was her line. That was the line from the 70s, was calling somebody a sucker. And then 2 wonderful women, Lynn Hamilton, who, if you remember the Waltons, if you remember the Waltons and the Black family that lived not too far, and that was the Waltons' way of dealing with diversity and sort of the racial bias that happened in West Virginia during the late 30s and 40s. Lynn Hamilton, followed by a woman named Mary Alice, who, if you saw I'll Fly Away, or what did you recognize her from?
A Different World.
Oh, because who was she in A Different World?
Do you want me to Google?
Yeah, I could have sworn she
was.
Wasn't she like the house mom?
Did they have a house mom?
I thought in the later episode. Or no. Am I getting my shows confused?
You might be.
That could be.
Mary Alice.
Yeah, I got her.
And then Helen Martin, again, who surfaces across a couple different shows, including 227, which we don't really get to because 227 was somebody else's. That was somebody else's series. That was not a Norman Lear thing, but 227 had a lot of influence.
A Perfect World.
A Different World?
No. Although these might just be movies.
Yeah.
Oh, here's
Yes,
television.
it was.
She was in Police Woman, Sanford and Son, Good Times, The Family Holvac, I don't know that one, Insight, Serpico, Visions, All My Children, A Different World.
Right.
She played Letty.
Letty.
For 25 episodes. The Women of Brewster Place and L.A. Law.
Very
And I'll Fly Away, Law and Order. Yeah,
very
she's been. Oh my gosh, I
trained as a teacher. She's 76 years old. She's still around. I hope she gets on to be a guest judge on SVU or something because she should.
Wow, yeah, she's been on.
She also did earn an Emmy for the supporting actress for I'll Fly Away, and she's in the American Theater Hall of Fame. That gets us to the Jeffersons, 1975 to 1985, which everybody has seen at least a handful of episodes, starring Isabel Sanford and my favorite character from that, Mrs. Sanford, who was George's mother, who was the thorn in Wheezy's side. But it also included Marla Gibbs, who went on to do 227 and actually write for 227, who also earned a whole bunch of NAACP awards. Just a fascinating group of women who came to, again, yet another series with a tremendous theater background. And then there was Roxy Roker as another neighbor. Yeah. What do you guys remember about Roxy Roker?
Interracial, the first time we saw an interracial marriage on TV, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Lenny Kravitz's mom.
There you go.
And so those facts are not lost on Norman Lear when he was out presenting his autobiography just a couple of years ago, and he was explaining some of these real tactical moves that they had done to get these casts built. And so he said that in making the very, very specific action of pairing or to create an interracial couple on the Jeffersons, what would that take, and who could do it? And so he was talking to Roxy Roker. She had tested well, and he said, "Do you realize you're going to be in an interracial marriage, the first interracial marriage on a sitcom?" And so he's telling the story, and she immediately came back to him and said, "Well, that's just fine because I'm in an interracial marriage." And that really said a lot, I think, to the amount of trust that people had in him, that they were going to be able to very capably represent a lot of social change that was going on. And when you think about those early 70s, all the way through the 70s, there was nothing but change, and Norman Lear was bringing it through. So the women who were trusting him to carry those messages and to then provide liberty to the writers, and these were largely white male writers, but they were, when a show is on for a dozen years, you actually get a good number of women writers who were then influential in carrying stories forward. You don't get to the discussion of influential women without talking about Maude.
I was waiting for you to say it, though. And then
there's Maude.
And then there's Maude.
Oh, and my favorite was The Simpsons. And then there's Maude, Homer. And then there's Maude. When he's yelling about Maude Flanders.
That uncompromising, enterprising, anything but tranquilizing. Right. So Maude aired from 1972 to 1978 and still continues to sort of circulate in syndication. It has both aged well and aged difficultly. But she definitely has a place in TV herstory. We've done an episode about her called Maude, the TV's timeless feminist icon. And the thing is just as all of those Norman Lear shows brought together social change and a lot of controversial topics, Maude jumped right in as a middle-aged woman. And middle-aged back then was 50, just so you guys know. So, she seemed very old at the time. Played by B. Arthur, who, again, had come to TV from the stage, and that's really important, from Broadway, and surrounded by some incredibly talented women who stayed with her in some fashion over the years. So B. Arthur had won a Tony for her appearance on Broadway in Mame. She also won 2 Emmys, one for Maude, and what else? What else for?
Golden Girls.
Yay! Do you like her in Golden Girls?
I love her.
What did you like about her? B. Arthur.
She kept her mom in line. Yeah, those were some flashy pantsuits for the 80s.
Well, she wore flashy stuff in Maude, too. I mean, she was a wardrobe time capsule.
Yeah. I think about her every time I put on one of my longer sweaters now.
Oh, gosh.
A fashion icon.
She, in her own way, in a middle-aged way.
And quite statuesque. Like,
Yes.
I mean, just her height. Like,
Yeah.
just like,
She had a presence.
quite. Yeah. And her sense of humor, of
Yes.
course.
And she could sing too because of
and
all
I-
that theater
I
stuff.
didn't know
So
that.
she really had presence. She was joined even in that show by Rue McClanahan. That's really where they first paired. Rue went on
didn't
to win an
realize that
Emmy
she
for
was
Golden
on that.
Girls. Had come from the stage as well. Did a little bit of film, but mainly Rue was more of a staple of TV, and just only recently. Well, they both only recently passed. I mean, a lot of these women, really, their longevity is kind of amazing. Adrienne Barbeau, who played her daughter Carol, only has gone on to have a significant presence, like at conventions and sci-fi things. She did a couple of sci-fi movies afterwards, both for kind of B-grade movies as well as on TV. Swamp Thing was awesome, and everybody should be proud of the work that they did, right? There, see, you we have a fourth seat up here. And then there was so Florida Evans was the first housekeeper, and then Mrs. Naugatuck was the second housekeeper. Mrs. Naugatuck being the British lady, right? Played by Hermione Baddeley, who was the first Hermione. That was the first time I had ever heard that name, right? And you might remember her from Mary Poppins. So she, again, another very accomplished actress who then came on to TV kind of later in life, and but she did win a Golden Globe as Mrs. Naugatuck. So yay for Hermione Baddeley. That brings us to the last series that we're going to talk about, and that is One Day at a Time. And this is because here Norman Lear is 95 years old. He turns 96 at the end of July.
Wow.
And he is still very influential in what we're seeing today. He's on Netflix right now with the One Day at a Time reboot, which has just been confirmed for its third season. And I guess I still sort of wonder, really, Netflix, did you need to kind of spread out the drama on that one? But there was a good campaign on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook about making sure that One Day at a Time, this present version, got renewed. The first one aired from 1975 to 1984, and while it might seem like 9 years, really, what could they talk about? This was America's first single mom divorcee. They used the word, she got called divorcee so often, Anne Romano.
What about Alice?
Alice was...
She was a single mom.
I think she was widowed.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So she was the first where they had to address
just
the
as
fact
Julia
that-
was a widow.
Yeah, I used to watch that,
So One Day at a Time, Anne Romano constantly got called a divorcee, and she had these two teenage daughters, and they ran the gamut of all of the rites of passage that young teenagers in, where was this located?
Indianapolis.
It was middle America, and it was middle class, and it was someone might call it middle brow, but it does actually age. It aged well, and Valerie Bertinelli aged very well, and we've seen her since in Hot in Cleveland. Bonnie Franklin had come from the stage. Valerie Bertinelli and Mackenzie Phillips, who played the daughters, they had pretty much, this was the first thing in their career, and it launched them to quite a career. Mackenzie Phillips, being the daughter of John Phillips and Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, has gone on to write a number of books, largely around her very, very public, all of her public episodes of addiction and sexual abuse.
Yeah, she's had a rough...
And a really rough go of it, but she's written books, and she's out there, and she's telling these stories, and that's important.
Yeah.
As well as Valerie Bertinelli, who has just written a bunch of cookbooks and has a TV show about cooking, and then was on Hot in Cleveland. And then you compare that. So then you say, well, what's going on with this current One Day at a Time? I haven't had a chance to check on it on Netflix. What's going on? What's that show about? It's about a middle American, middle class family trying to make it work at this time without a man in the house, a single mom, with the presence, however, of a very inventive and gregarious grandma, played by Rita Moreno. You really, it's worth, it is absolutely worth the binge. Yeah. It is worth the binge. Justina Machado is fantastic. This is her first big role, but she's done lots of other work prior. And then they are joined by a pair of teenagers who, again, had just done some small roles leading up to it. And Norman Lear found the right chemistry and has just unleashed the writers to tell the story of, and it's a story that deals with ageism and sexism and racism, because this is a Cuban-American family. So really, we have been able to count on Norman Lear to come up with the right themes and the right ensembles to do this storytelling. But when you think about this incredible list of women and the years of talent, of theater experience and film experience that brought them to the TV, you can understand now why these are classics, why they continue to be in syndication, and why when you watch an episode and then you hear that live audience clapping at the end, like at the end of a Maud or a Good Times, they really just watched a 24-minute little Broadway show. Yeah. It was that level, that caliber of acting. So that's what we talk about here on Advanced TV Herstory. We talk about telling the stories of women in TV, behind the scenes. We haven't had a chance to talk to about some of the writers. I will just simply say that if you want to get more information about TV Herstory and Advanced TV Herstory as a podcast, go to our website at www.tvherstory.com. On Instagram, you can follow us at TV Herstory. Twitter, we decided to make it where every character counts. It's just at TV Herstory. Also, you'll find us on Facebook and YouTube, and we're going to really begin populating more video into our YouTube channel. Email us with your ideas for more ideas or invitations to PopCons in Indianapolis or anywhere else at advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. We are also on Patreon because quality does not come cheap, right, Jen?
That's right.
And of course, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcast, Radio Public, almost any place you can find a podcast. You'll find us here at Advanced TV Herstory.
And you are in here, your social media is in here.
Yes, social media is in the program.
If you're take it with you,
listening to us here at the podcast at PopCon, my many, many thanks to Martha Southgate and Jen Eads for contributing and chiming in where you recognized a face and said, I remember her, because that's what it's all about.
And I just want to say one quick thing. As you're saying that Norman Lear is still doing this and that this show is talking about them being a Cuban family, I am so sad and angry that we're still having to have these conversations. Like, poor Norman, he's probably thought, okay, we'll have pushed through this by then. And he's going, I'm 96 and we're still having this conversation. So that's all. I just wanted to...
And he's joined by a lot of women in that same sentiment, as are you. So thanks for adding that suffix. And thanks for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.
For updates about upcoming SMG Podcast Marathons, follow us on Twitter at SMG Pods, on Facebook at Southgate Media Group, or go to our website and sign up for our email list at southgatemediagroup.com. Thanks again for listening.